Jennifer Teege pulled a thick volume from the library shelf and opened the cover. She instantly recognized her mother's face printed on the very first page. In 2008, the 38-year-old woman stumbled upon a document that launched an investigation into her own family history. She leaned closer to the book. Her fingers traced the glossy surface of an old black-and-white photograph. The image captured a man and a woman standing in bright sunlight. It was the 1940s. The man wore an SS uniform. The woman next to him, Ruth Irene Calder, smiled warmly. They looked like an ordinary couple enjoying a quiet afternoon. But 100 meters behind their backs, daily executions took place. Behind those exact trees stood the Plaszow concentration camp. At its operational peak, the facility held around 25,000 prisoners. The man laughing in the sun was Amon Goeth.
He commanded the camp. Jennifer was born in 1970. She spent decades without knowing her grandfather's true identity. Now she traced the letters of his name beneath the photograph. She read the title of the book out loud. She immediately left the library and initiated a formal historical search into the German National Archives.
The documents found in the archive traced the man in the photograph back to a specific political timeline. Nazi Germany annexed Austria on March 12, 1938. Within hours of the Anschluss, Vienna transformed into a stronghold of the Third Reich. Swastikas filled the main streets. For Amon Goeth, this day marked a major turning point. It was the culmination of a documented political trajectory that authorities had carefully recorded over the previous decade. He was born in Vienna on December 11, 1908. His wealthy family owned a prosperous book and art publishing business. His official files from his youth show a steady gravitation toward right-wing paramilitary organizations. He abandoned traditional academic pursuits and his brief agricultural studies, choosing instead to join anti-Semitic youth brigades. By 1930, he formalized his political commitments by joining the Austrian branch of the Nazi Party. Shortly after this registration, he officially enlisted in the SS. He entered an organization constructed on strict ideological obedience rather than mere military discipline. Following the prohibition of the Nazi Party in Austria in 1933, the movement fractured. Thousands of its members went underground or fled across the border into Bavaria. Goeth relocated his operations to Munich to maintain his activities within the illegal network. He operated as a courier for the SS. He smuggled weapons, radio equipment, and printed propaganda materials back into Austrian territory. But local authorities detained him during one of these illegal border crossings. A lack of concrete evidence forced his immediate release. His clandestine operations abruptly ended when the 1938 annexation allowed him to step out of the shadows, returning to Vienna openly as an established officer. With his political position secured, his party assumed total control over the Austrian capital. His domestic life aligned with his professional advancement. Later that same year, he married his second wife, Anna Geiger. His documented progression through the hierarchy of the SS continued without any interruptions. While his legal wife remained in Vienna, Ruth Irene Calder arranged porcelain on a dining table. The German secretary moved into Amon Goeth's villa in occupied Poland. The house stood meters away from the barbed wire. Plaszow concentration camp covered 80 hectares on the outskirts of Krakow. Inside the villa, Calder dressed elegantly for evening receptions. She greeted SS officers with a smile. Guests drank wine and laughed over dinner. Outside the windows, starvation and executions continued without a pause. To mask the reality, phonographs played loudly across the estate. Classical music drowned out the noise from the camp. Calder maintained a domestic routine beside a site of murder. She embraced this proximity. She chose to ignore the daily violence. She gave birth to Goeth's daughter, Monika Hertwig. In September 1946, Polish authorities executed the commandant, yet the denial persisted for decades. Calder defended Goeth until the end. She told Monica he was a good man. She insisted he simply followed military orders. The mother protected the illusion of a loving father. Monica grew up inside this lie. The legend of a decent father survived for decades. Genetics finally broke the carefully maintained illusion. In 1944, the strict racial laws enforced by Amon Goeth demanded immediate execution for mixing blood. In 2008, his dark-skinned granddaughter sat in a Hamburg library reading his historical biography. Monica had given birth to Jennifer in 1970, following a brief relationship with a visiting Nigerian student. The Nuremberg racial laws of 1935 criminalized physical relationships between Aryans and other races. Understanding this historical reality, the young woman published a memoir titled Amon, My Grandfather Would Have Shot Me. The racial ideology of the Schutzstaffel collided directly with the living, biological existence of the commandant's own descendants. Ruth Irene Calder committed suicide in 1983 after giving an interview about her relationship. The history behind that relationship began with a bureaucratic shift. The illusion of a normal civilian life vanished when Amon Goeth volunteered for the Waffen-SS. September 1st, 1939. This exact date moved paper confiscations into the physical realm of deportations. He deployed to occupied Poland, first in Upper Silesia, then deeper into the general government territory. His early work involved pure logistics, confiscating Jewish businesses and organizing forced resettlements. He coordinated the railway transport schedules to the east. Goeth proved highly efficient at moving deportees, showing zero emotional response to the massive scale of the operations. This efficiency earned him a transfer to Lublin in the summer of 1942, placing him directly under Schutzstaffel General Odilo Globocnik. Globocnik directed Operation Reinhard. This program built the extermination facilities at Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka. During the span of this operation, approximately 2 million people were murdered. Goeth organized the local roundups. He managed the railway schedules that supplied those exact locations, and his precision deeply impressed the high command. By early 1943, the leadership handed him his own project. They ordered him to construct a new concentration camp in the southern suburbs of Krakow. The Plaszow facility required a massive foundation. The chosen site covered 2 existing Jewish cemeteries. Prisoners from the surrounding areas marched to the grounds. The sharp sound of pickaxes crushing stone echoed across the hill. Inmates had to dig through the broken granite and exhume buried human remains just to clear the land for the barracks. Whenever the digging slowed down, Goeth executed workers on the spot to accelerate the pace. The new camp needed an immediate labor force.
On March 13, 1943, the Krakow Ghetto was liquidated in a single sweep. 16,000 residents. Guards drove them from their homes at gunpoint. The elderly and the sick boarded trains directly to extermination sites. Those deemed fit for physical labor marched on foot to the newly built barracks. Goeth received his official appointment as the commandant of Plaszow. The newly appointed commandant stepped onto the balcony of his stone villa. He held a scoped hunting rifle in his hands. Amon Goeth had just declared to the newly arrived prisoners that he was their god, and this morning he intended to prove it. He raised the weapon. He scanned the expanding 80-hectare compound below, looking for a target among the work details. An inmate pushed a wheelbarrow too slowly across the quarry. Goeth pulled the trigger. The man dropped dead in the mud. Plaszow held over 20,000 inmates. It became a zone of total personal control where murder required no paperwork, only a sudden shift in the commandant's mood. A Jewish cook brought lunch to the table. The soup was too hot. Goeth drew his pistol and shot the cook on the spot. He executed his own dog handler for a similarly arbitrary reason. The handler spent his days caring for the animals, and eventually, the massive dogs began to prefer his company to the commandant's.
Collective punishment replaced individual infractions. If one prisoner escaped, 10 others faced the firing squad without trial or hesitation. Göth ordered thousands of inmates into tight formations on the square. He walked down the silent rows. He commanded his guards to shoot every second or fifth person in the line. Men and women fell to the dirt without knowing their offense. He kept 2 Great Danes named Rolf and Ralph. He trained them to attack humans on command. Göth stood on the parade ground and pointed at a prisoner. He unleashed the animals. The dogs tore the inmates apart right in front of the commandant. Dogs and bullets form the constant backdrop of Plaszow. Yet survival occasionally hinged on entirely different factors. For a newly arrived pianist, performing classical music became the only way to avoid execution. A prisoner transport arrived in 1943, exactly on the commandant's birthday. Guards pulled Polish pianist Natalia Karp from the crowd and ordered her straight to a piano. This camp held 20,000 inmates, all bound by the same arbitrary terror. She played Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. The most delicate piece of the classical repertoire echoed across the yard, performed under the direct threat of a gun. The final notes faded into the dead silence of the barracks. He let Natalia and her sister live. Everything depended on one man. While daily executions continued on the Hujowa Gorka Hill, German industrialist Oskar Schindler deliberately attended SS parties to find the commandant's weak point. The camp claimed between 8,000 and 12,000 victims. Shooters on the hill killed both inmates and political prisoners from Krakow. Schindler needed workers for his Emalia factory. Officially, his plant manufactured enamelware for the military. This contract provided a legitimate pretext to demand manpower. He infiltrated the inner circle. He sat at the banquets. He drank with SS officers. He handed over substantial bribes. His goal was the physical transfer of his Jewish workers. He pushed to move them out of the main facility entirely. The commandant eventually allowed them to relocate to separate barracks adjacent to the Emalia plant. This administrative decision removed hundreds of people from the immediate threat of random shootings. Schindler bought lives through calculated manipulation. The scent of expensive cognac always lingered around the commandant's table during these deals. A premium bottle and proper flattery secured the transfers. By 1944, Göth's position began to crack. That cracking position eventually led to a cell. But why did the Gestapo arrest the Plaszow commandant in September 1944? They detained him strictly for protocol violations and embezzling stolen diamonds. The SS investigative department ignored the thousands of executions taking place outside his window. They cared only about confiscated property that officially belonged to the German state. Internal complaints piled up on bureaucratic desks, confirming that Göth diverted confiscated valuables into his own pockets. The resulting charges focused entirely on financial corruption and internal disciplinary failures. As the German military collapsed in early 1945, the SS quietly abandoned the corruption trial. Doctors declared the commandant mentally unfit for duty, moving him to a specialized sanitarium in Bad Tolz. He traded his tailored black attire for the rough, standardized fabric of a regular Wehrmacht infantry uniform. He hoped the coarse wool texture would conceal his rank from the advancing Allied forces. However, hiding in Bad Tolz presented a severe logical flaw. The town hosted the SS Junkerschule, the primary training academy for the entire organization. Claiming to be a simple army conscript in that specific Bavarian area was highly suspicious. American troops secured the sanitarium grounds in May 1945. During the initial processing, the disguised commandant stood in line and confidently claimed to be a regular army soldier. The interrogators reviewed his paperwork alongside hundreds of retreating men. The deception fell apart within minutes. Former Plaszow inmates walking through the liberated camp spotted the familiar face among the Wehrmacht prisoners. They stepped forward and pointed him out to the American military police. That identification in Bad Tolz stripped away his disguise. It triggered his extradition to Poland in 1946. The Supreme National Tribunal in Krakow charged him with over 10,000 documented murders. Amon Goeth sat in the dock and methodically filed his fingernails. The trial ran from August 27th to September 5th. The room was packed with former prisoners. Witness after witness took the stand. They detailed the liquidations of Plaszow, the Krakow Ghetto, holding 15,000 people, the Tarnow Ghetto, and the Szebnik camp. Göth showed no reaction to the testimony. The dry scrape of his metal nail file sounded clearly across the quiet courtroom. He simply stated he followed orders. Looking at the crowd, he muttered his surprise that so many Jews had somehow survived the war. The tribunal handed down the death sentence in Krakow on September 13, 1946.
Hours after the verdict, on September 13, 1946, the executioners halted the procedure inside the Montelupich prison courtyard. The rope length simply did not match the prisoner. Amon Goeth stood 2 meters tall. At over 6.5 feet, his height disrupted the standard drop calculations. Guards climbed the wooden platform to untie the heavy knot. They shortened the thick hemp rope. They secured the noose again. The second attempt failed exactly like the first. The drop distance remained insufficient for a clean break. They adjusted the clearance a third time. The heavy wooden trapdoor finally creaked open under his weight. Göth died at 37 years old. His last recorded words praised the German dictator. Prison officials cremated the corpse inside the facility. They swept the remaining ashes straight into the Vistula River. This waterway cuts directly through the heart of Krakow.
It winds past the former Jewish ghetto and curves around the old Plaszow camp boundaries. The physical residue of the commander drifted right through his own crime scenes. He left no grave behind. The authorities ensured his physical erasure was complete. Decades later, his former mistress, Ruth Irene, took her own life. The woman from the villa balcony died by suicide in 1983.